Hi there. It's February 11th and we're continuing our journey through the good news of Matthew, and we're in chapter 26, and we're going from verses 69 through to chapter 27 verse 14. We find the opening of this reading, Peter following along behind Jesus, keeping at a safe distance so that he's not implicated in the things that are going on that Jesus is being subjected to. While he's there, he is surrounded by people. He's warming himself by a fire, maybe in the hallway outside, and people are gathering round and passing by, and he's recognized. He's recognized partly by his Galilean accent. He's a northerner. He comes from the north. He's not speaking in the same way as the people in Jerusalem do, and so he's uncovered. And there are three different occasions where he is pointed out as one of the followers of Jesus. Each time he denies it. Each time he says he doesn't know him. The motive will have been self-protection. It will have been so that he doesn't get caught up in the maelstrom of terrible things that are happening, and so that he can continue his freedom. But whatever happens, he still denies Jesus and says he doesn't know him. A couple of times he does it with an oath. He kind of swears that he isn't Jesus' follower, which makes it even worse, given what Jesus has said about not swearing oaths, but just letting your yes be yes and your no be no. And then the third time, he hears the cock crow, and he remembers those words of Jesus when he was busy swearing his undying fealty and love and loyalty to Jesus, that Jesus said, actually, by the time the cock crows in the morning, you will have denied me 3 times. It says he goes out and he weeps bitterly. And there's something about the fact that Matthew records those words, eklatse pikros in Greek. He wept bitterly. And the fact is bitterly that we see Peter's heart, Peter's broken heart over this situation. And then we see Jesus in the midst of the religious leaders. He's been judged. They're trying to find a way to put him to death, but the only way they can put him to death is by taking him to the Roman governor, which is where they're going to take him now, because the Jews didn't have the ability to commit someone for capital punishment. It had to be the Roman governor who did that. And then we have the story of another man here, another person who's denied Jesus, not only denied Jesus but betrayed Jesus. This is Judas Iscariot, and Judas is filled with remorse at what he's done. Perhaps the expected turn of events with Jesus overthrowing the Romans, it hasn't happened. Judas realizes he's tried to force Jesus' hand, but it hasn't worked, and he goes in frustration and in remorse to the temple, and he throws the 30 pieces of silver down in the temple. And it's interesting that he does that in that place where Jesus has already said that it will fall. And here are the pieces of silver thrown out across the temple floor, this place where God is supposed to live. But the leaders refuse it. They will not have anything to do with it. It's blood money. It's money that's been paid for a man. So they put it to a use which is they can't put it into the normal temple treasury. They're being very picky. They're following the law in this. And so they buy a field, the potter's field, to bury non-Jews in as an act of mercy, as an act of charity. But in the midst of it, they don't realize, or they haven't seen, that they're fulfilling the words of the prophet Jeremiah. And again, Matthew sees this, even this small event that Jesus had no control over, as fulfillment of the words of Jeremiah's prophecy, that they would take these 30 pieces of silver and they would buy the potter's field with it. And then Jesus is standing before Pilate now, Pontius Pilate, who was not the greatest governor. He'd actually been put in, the Judean governor had been put in instead of a Syrian king, instead of the previous king, because of the unrest and because of the trouble there was, because of the moves for independence among the Jews. And therefore Pontius Pilate is very much a politician. He's very much one who's keeping the peace. He's known to have mown down unarmed civilians. He's taken money from the temple treasury at times to build an aqueduct. He's done all kinds of things that are not according to his remit. So he's a politician, and we meet him in that guise as one who Jesus stands before, and he questions Jesus and says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And you almost see him hear him saying it sneeringly, because obviously in his understanding Caesar is Lord, Caesar is the king, not Jesus. And so he says, "Are you the king of the Jews then?" Jesus doesn't say anything. Jesus stands in quietness, in silence. In fact, what he says to Pilate is, he says, "You're saying this. It's you that's saying this." And he turns Pilate's words back on himself. And then he won't say a word. He takes a silent stance. And this amazes Pilate, because Pilate expects Jesus to have some defense. And Jesus stands defenseless here before the political governor. We can learn so much, can't we, in these situations that we see in this reading, particularly from the situation of Judas, who is filled with remorse, but actually doesn't find a place of repentance. He doesn't turn around and find his way back to Jesus. Whereas with Peter, who we've seen, even though he wept bitterly, even though he denied Jesus, he still is hanging in there. He turns around eventually. He's restored eventually. So we have these two different pictures. The picture of Peter, who finds a place of repentance. The picture of Judas, who though is filled with remorse, doesn't turn away from the things he's done. And that ends up being his undoing. God is always looking for us to come home to him. In the daily Jewish prayer, it talks about God being a God who delights in return, who delights in us coming home to him. So whatever it is we do, however we let God down, however we hurt him, he always leaves a place for homecoming. Have a very good February the 11th.